Well, I'm Daniel Davis, and my background, I come from working with environmental law. I've done a lot of things over the years. I moved up to Idaho 24 years ago to work as a government trapper. I have a background in wildlife management. I've fought against environmental law to keep sportsmen, mostly sportsmen, so that they have that right to hunt, trap, and fish in the state of Idaho. But I've also been a small business owner. I run an online business right now, work as a meat cutter up at Matt's Meats there in St. Anthony. I'm married for 28 years. I have 4 children, 2 that are still in the lower grades, and I've got 2 that are, one that just graduated from college and one that's in college right now. And I'm running because I see a degradation of our rights and freedoms in this country, and instead of complaining about it, I feel like it was time for me to stand up and to go and do something about it instead of complaining about it. And so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Jerald, your turn.
Thank you very much. Jerald Raymond. My wife Sherry and I live in Manan, which is west of Rigby, a little ways. Both raised and educated in Jefferson County. We have 6 married children and 22 grandchildren. We're in the livestock business and have been our entire married life. We have had some wonderful opportunities, leadership opportunities with both the Farm Bureau and with the Idaho Cattle Association, and treasure those experiences. We've made friends across the entire nation as a result of our experiences there. As an appointee of the Secretary of Interior, I served. I just finished my term as on the Resource Advisory Council for the Bureau of Land Management, and worked with other interested parties in protecting the multiple uses of public lands. Had experience as a local elected official, and look forward to the opportunity of making sure that there's not conflict between state and local government. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. First question, we'll go to Jerald and go to Daniel. What political PACs, groups, or organizations are currently campaigning for you, have endorsed you, or provided money for your campaign?
Oh, wow.
Sorry, that's we'll throw out a curveball for the first one. The rest are easy.
So we have to be very careful that we don't use the word endorse in some cases, because those PACs prefer not to endorse, but if they provide funds, then they obviously offer support for the campaign. I will mention those that I can remember. The Idaho Cattle Association, the Idaho Farm Bureau Federation, Idaho Chooses Life.
Well, most of my support has come in from the sportsmen that I've helped for so many years, and namely the trappers. I got support from the Idaho Trappers Association. I've got not financial support, but support. I don't know what you call it. A pat on the back, I guess, from the National Trappers Association, which I spent 14 years helping them out. And then I did get a donation from the Idaho Food Growers Association, but they were specific to saying that there wasn't an endorsement, that it was just support from them. So other than that, I've given myself support on this. So.
Excellent. Thank you both. Appreciate it. This next, we'll start with Daniel. We'll go back to Jerald.
Sure.
What do you feel are the top 3 issues District 35 is facing?
Well, there's so many issues that it's, I think when you look at it, what I think is top 3 and what somebody else might think is top 3 might be different, but one of the top issues right now, of course, is the overpasses up in the Targhee Pass area, and that's a big concern to me because, our infrastructure, the road up through there is not very good shape, and they want to take the funds that were set aside to repair the road and build new infrastructure. And I think we need to fix the old infrastructure first before we go forward with that. But some of the other issues, that's real important to me is, you know, Fremont County used to have a huge logging industry here. And because of the environmental law that's come in and lawsuits, they haven't been able to touch the forest up there. And we see throughout our country all the fires that have been caused. And, you know, you go down to the lumber store, we're buying our lumber from Canada. So I don't understand why we're buying lumber from Canada when our forests are catching fire and burning down. So that's a big issue for me. I'd like to see the loggers get back to work. And other than that, there's some issues along the Snake River a little bit with BLM coming in and given some problems with the landowners there. And I don't want that to flare up like it has in other parts of the countries. And so I would like to work with the BLM and get that resolved. So,
okay.
Thanks.
Excellent, thank you.
Could you repeat your question? Was it 3?
Yeah, top 3 issues.
Okay, so we're focusing on our campaign. We're focusing on 3 major issues. I'd like to just briefly mention a couple of others, but number 1, education. I think it's so important that if we want our children and our grandchildren to stay in Idaho, that we provide for them good educations and job opportunities so they can stay here locally. So I'm totally supportive of responsible funding for education. The second thing is infrastructure. And obviously, across the state, infrastructure is of major concern to the citizens of Idaho. To make sure we have the opportunity to travel safely is important to me. I agree with what Dan has said. One of the main issues in the northern part of our district is the Targhee Pass issue. And I wholeheartely respect the opinions of the local people up there who are going to have to live with the consequences of whatever changes come about there. The third leg of our campaign is agriculture. We are an agriculture state. In fact, we're the 4th largest agriculture state in the Union. We need to remember that. We need to enhance our markets and make sure that we protect Idaho's agriculture, all phases of it. Another issue that is in the forefront of people's minds in our district is healthcare. That is a huge issue, and we will do all that we can as a state to bring that back from the federal government so that we can either have a state program or a private program, preferably a private program, so the citizens of the state can have quality health care and that they can afford the health care that they have.
Excellent, thank you. Next one will be Jerald, to go to Daniel.
Okay.
It will be, do you support or are you against the repeal of the state grocery tax?
I am in support of the repeal of the tax, providing that there's not another tax added somewhere else. Taxing groceries, groceries are an essential item for every family. Taxing the grocery items that could easily be repealed, in my opinion. The proposed legislation the legislation that was proposed prior, we don't know what legislation may come up in the future, but suggested that we only tax those items that are usable under the state. I'm sorry, the name has slipped my mind. Food stamps. So it'd be a SNAP tax. SNAP items is what it would amount to. Any other items, luxury items, household items, cleaning items, stuff like that the exemption would not go away for those items. One of the challenges with the grocery tax is that we have cities on our borders, near our borders, on all sides in every state, that are not being able to be competitive with grocery stores across the state line who do not have grocery tax. So in that regard, the grocery tax is not entirely fair. And so as long as we can not add another tax somewhere else, I'm in favor of repealing the grocery tax.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I actually, one of the main reasons I'm running is because of taxes and regulation. And, you know, I've had it explained to me, and I've tried to look at both sides of the grocery tax. According to some people, They say that they figure in so much of the grocery tax that you can have as write-off on your taxes so that you can get that back. And the grocery tax credit, they call it. And they say what that does is that it allows for people who are tourists and stuff that come through here, they don't get that, and so that money's coming in. But to me, that gets a little complicated. I would love to see the grocery tax repealed entirely. And not only do I not want to see taxes added other places, I look out across our community here and I see so many families that are living paycheck to paycheck, and they barely have enough money to even make ends meet. And some of those families, it's not just one person in the family working, it's mom and dad both working, and they're still barely making ends meet. And we ask people to tighten their belt. I think it's time for the government to tighten their belt, and for them to look at not only repealing the grocery tax, but look at other places where they can cut back, and other programs that we can cut a lot of pork out of, I guess you call it, and get the money back to the people. They say that it takes money to make money. Well, businesses and people, it's the same way. They've got to have that money to make money. And when you take too many taxes out of a community, the whole community suffers and it goes backwards. And we see that because we're losing our middle class, and we're losing, we've got all these people that are becoming working poor people. They work pretty hard, and they still just don't have enough money. So we really, really need to look at taxes and how we spend them, and be very careful with people's money.
Excellent. Thank you both. The next question is regards to school safety. School safety is one of the biggest issues in this nation right now. In the next legislative session, how can the state legislature make Idaho schools safer? And we'll start with Daniel and go to Jerald.
Well, I think it's very simple. In the Bill of Rights, we were given the Second Amendment, and if you look at what's going on in this country, 98% of all mass shootings are done in gun-free zones. And that's what happens when you start messing with people's rights and freedoms. And so the notion that a teacher gets up in the morning and goes to school, they have to set aside their right to be armed, just to go to work in the morning, is ridiculous. Now, the school where my kids go, I was there recently, they lock all the doors around the school so that there's only one place that can be entered, and unless somebody breaks a window or something to get in. But the secretary, I had a good talk with her. She's like, you know what, I'm all for this. She says, I'll go take any training that I need. And if I need to stop somebody when they come in the front door, she says, I'm all for it. And we have so many good people like that. And, when people call for us to have just policemen and soldiers with guns, one of the great things about the Second Amendment is that there are so many good people in our community that would stand up and stop any kind of problems like that. We need that Second Amendment, and we need to allow people to freely carry the means to protect themselves. And one good example of that would be, in the Parkland shooting in Florida. The resource officer that was hired to be there to protect that school stood outside while the shooting was going on. And the coaches that were in there were the ones that jumped in front of the kids to stop them from getting hurt, and they were the ones that got killed. So what would have happened if those coaches would have been able to have concealed carry? They probably could have stopped that. Now, there's another part to that as well. I think that we really, as a society, we need to look at the fact that we have a huge problem. We need to figure out how to work with these kids that are kind of outcasts, that kind of feel like they're left out. They're bullied. The very people who are calling for gun control at Parkland, Florida, those kids, they admitted to bullying the kid that was accused of doing the shooting. That's got to stop. And I think we do a real good job here at our schools with the anti-bullying campaign. I've seen that. I've seen the teachers get involved in that. We need to keep doing that, but we also, as a society, we need to start looking at people that are a little bit outcast and putting our arm around them and befriending them. not only would that stop some of the problems with the violence, it could also cut down on things like suicide, which has been an epidemic in this country. You know, half of our country right now is on antidepressants, and we need to figure out what we need to do to get that turned around and get our citizens back in good mental health and working together. So,
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the main responsibility for the state as it relates to school safety, and I realize that this is a very serious and a very, it's not a simple solution, it's gut-wrenching, it's something that we're all very concerned about because these are our children that we're talking about. But back to the answer, I think the main responsibility the state has is to make sure that the schools are properly funded for those types of situations. It becomes a law enforcement issue, and schools who have school resource officers are jointly funded typically by the school district and by the county through the sheriff's office. I think it's important, I think it's very important for us to realize that as it is a law enforcement issue, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for this. Some school districts have higher priorities, some have different priorities. I think it would be very wise for all school districts to work hand in hand with their local sheriff's office. The sheriff is an elected constitutional officer. He has a budget. He can work with that budget, and the school district has a budget. They can work with that budget, and as they work jointly, there can be that opportunity to have school resource officers and law enforcement protection. I think it's important that those who are in the schools as school resource officers are properly trained. They are properly trained law enforcement officers. I do agree that there are maybe others in the schools who may be appropriately armed. However, the administrators that I have visited with indicate that they would prefer that not all teachers be armed, because there are some that simply they would not prefer that all teachers be armed. I think one of the things that the state could help with funding with is that some of these kids that are troubled need to have risk assessments. They need to be counseled, and we need to know where those risks are and how we can help those kids who typically may be the ones who would create a challenge for the school districts.
How can the state of Idaho improve the healthcare system for its residents?
That is a very complicated question as well. I think ultimately we need to decide as a society and I think it needs to be divided in two. What does healthcare look like, and what does insurance coverage look like? I think those are two separate issues. But as a society, I think we need to decide whether health insurance is a right or whether it's a choice. I think healthcare is a right. I think that doctors take a Hippocratic oath when they vow to be doctors to do no harm and to help people. Unfortunately, we have laws that don't do all they can to protect doctors. Even when they offer services without pay, sometimes they can be sued if they make a mistake. I think that needs to be looked at. I think tort reform needs to be looked at seriously. So I think healthcare is a choice, and I think everyone deserves to have good health care, regardless of where they get it, whether it's an emergency room or a clinic or wherever. Insurance, on the other hand, the thing we've got to do as a state is all we can to bring that back to a manageable level without involving the federal government. I lived in a foreign country, a socialistic country, for 2 years, and saw socialistic medicine then. And we've got it now. That's what we have. And we need to do all we can to take that from the federal government and bring it to privatize it. If we can possibly go back to to privatize insurance. Make it affordable for everyone. Make it a choice for everyone. Mandating it for everyone is simply not the right answer in my opinion.
Thank you. Daniel?
Just one little point on there. If we decide as a society that healthcare is a right, that you have a right to that, then basically you're enslaving the doctors. And so I do not believe that's a right, and that it just can't be, or else it will enslave the doctors. But one thing I do agree on big time is the tort reform bills. Talking with my own doctor, he mentioned that working here in Idaho, that there's not really a whole lot of incentive for doctors because of the amount of money that they can make here. But he did tell me that the one thing that Idaho does have going for them is their tort reform bills, which puts a cap on how much they can be sued. And he said that makes a difference in his insurance between $8,000 a year and $40,000 a year if there wasn't that tort reform. So it does make a difference. One of the biggest things we need to look at with healthcare is how much it costs, and that is, like you said, two parts. That has to do with regulation and involvement from the government, and it also has to do with the insurance companies. Part of the cost of insurance is pushed by the insurance companies. They want that cost to be high, and the reason for that is when you start calculating it out is that, especially since Obamacare come in and all of the deductibles went high, just about everybody out there is actually paying all the cost of their health care throughout the year and then having to buy insurance on top of that. And so it's really a tough deal. And then, like I said, my wife and my daughter are both nurses in the medical field, and they, we've talked a lot about all the regulations that they have to deal with, which cause the cost of that health insurance to go up. So what really needs to happen with health insurance is we need to cut out all unnecessary regulation, and we need to open that up to free markets and get a little bit of competition in there. That competition will drive the cost down significantly and make it so it's more affordable for everybody involved. And if one of the questions they keep asking is about this Medicare gap that they're talking about. I think they said 79,000 people or something in Idaho are to the point where they can't afford insurance. Well, that's because of all the involvement into that. And it is a very complicated, very, very complicated situation. And it's going to take some time to sort everything out. But we need to push back against, like I said, the regulation and the insurance companies when it comes to the actual cost of the medical care. And so, anyways, that's pretty much it. Thanks.
Excellent. Both great answers. Very thoughtful. Thanks.
Another thing just to add to that that would be helpful would be transparency in billing.
Mm-hmm.
That would be very, very helpful.
Several states surrounding Idaho have passed some form of marijuana legalization. What are your views on legalizing marijuana? Starting with Daniel, going back to Jerald.
Well, I think it's kind of a complicated situation, and I go back to the time of Prohibition on alcohol. Now, the government did not have authority, constitutional authority, to outlaw alcohol, so they had to pass an amendment to do so, a constitutional amendment. And then when they figured out that that was a failure, then they repealed that. And but when they did that, they turned right around and went into pushing against drugs. So it's kind of interesting to, when you go back and research it, I often wonder what constitutional authority that they have to regulate drugs like they do. Marijuana is a weed that you can grow in your backyard. I mean, it's just a plant. But I do also look at that. Myself, I would never ever deal with marijuana or my family. We don't smoke or drink or anything like that. But that's a personal thing for us. However, I have a nephew that has epilepsy, and he's not responded to any of the medicines he's been given over the years. And I look at the whole situation, and it really frustrates me that they're so tight on that, because what he needs is called CBC oil, which is just an oil that's extracted out of that plant. It's not like he's smoking that, trying to get high or anything like that. And I think that he should be able to have that as a medicine to try and see if that works. As far as the legalizing it just for anybody to go buy a joint and go smoke it and get high, I look at that kind of like I do as alcohol. You know, we as a society, we need to think about what we're doing. Alcohol is legal, but look at the cost that costs our society. All of the drunk driving accidents, all of the rehab centers, and all those kind of things that we have to do to help deal with people who have a drinking problem, who are addicted to that. And I look at the same way with the marijuana. So as far as allowing the marijuana to be grown, it's got a lot of benefits to it, and I think those benefits should be explored. But I think that as a society we need to look at what the cost would be to our society if that was opened back up. But then again, like I said, I also question the constitutional authority to outlaw that in the first place. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
I'm definitely opposed to legalization of marijuana. I believe and am cautiously optimistic that the legislature will find a reasonable resolve for the cannabis oil issue. I would be supportive if it were, if the legislation contained language that would indicate that it's a prescribed medicine, not just a doctor's permission slip, but a prescribed medicine obtained through a pharmacy where its content is guaranteed and the prescription is, the amount is given as a prescription dose.
Thank you. Excellent. Last main question here. What will you do to promote District 34's interest in the state legislature? Jerald and Daniel.
That's a great question. And I think in order to do that very thing, in order to protect the interests, you have to know what those interests are. And so consequently, I will be out in the district, visiting with people, asking their opinions, knowing what the issues are. I have quipped or joked that we will spend 90% of our time, we, meaning those in the legislature, 90% of our time preparing for 10% of our votes. And I think that's important. I think that we need to be prepared, not just to vote on a whim or a portion of information, but to study the issues, to know how it affects the people. I think a lot of issues are local in nature. I think a lot of solutions are local in nature. I'm not in favor of taking any issues that can be solved locally to a state level and try and force that decision on the counties or cities, municipalities, or whatever. I think that where local issues can find local solutions, that's where they should be found. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's interesting you should ask that question because that's why I'm here, because I've been listening to people for so many years and talking to business owners, talking to teachers, talking to, government employees. And one of the biggest issues we have is with regulation. And people, and that regulation can cause infringements on their on rights. One of the biggest complaints I hear is about property rights. And how, the government says they can do this or they can do that, and they have to have permission to do this, and they got to buy a permit for that. Well, property rights are equal in footing with any of our other rights. And, if you start plugging that into other things, what if you had to pay taxes or you're not able to go to church on Sunday? Or what if you had to get a permit to put a scope on your rifle? I mean, it's just gotten way out of hand. And along with that, the taxes that we've discussed with a little bit. And I look at a lot of those regulations, they're completely unnecessary. So what a lot of people would like is exactly what our president suggested. He said, if we're going to pass a law, we're going to take 2 off the books. And that's what the people want. They want that regulation cut back. And one of the problems with it is that we pass all these laws every year, and there are very few of them that are taken off. And so sometimes you'll get 15, 16 laws dealing with the one issue. And there only needs to be one law on that issue. And so one of the things I would push for is, if we're going to pass a new law, is to go back and look at all the other laws that are dealing with that issue. And if you're gonna pass a law that supersedes previous law, then all those other laws need to be completely swept out and removed. And so, like I said, that talking with the people, that's the biggest thing, especially business owners. I was just down talking to the cheese factory down in Rigby, and some of the things that he's got to go through just to produce some cheese for people to eat is just unbelievable. And so that's what people have been telling me for over 20 years, that they need that regulation moved back and rights restored, rights and freedoms restored. So.
Excellent. And then the final, or
Adam, could I go back and just add one thing
You're welcome
to the
absolutely.
cannabis oil
yeah,
issue?
go ahead. Yeah.
So, my support for the use of cannabis oil would be based on scientific studies and scientific evidence. And it's interesting that in the state right now, there are about 40 young people who are on an experimental, part of an experimental project. And the FDA has indicated that there's a possibility that they will give the green light for the use of cannabis oil in people who have need of it, possibly by June 27th of this year.
But I just like that one other thing too, that people need to also, when you're thinking about the cannabis oil, not that it's necessarily regulated, but if you have a lab that has a certain standard, then that gives you a certain strength on that cannabis oil, which is necessary for medicine. And so if it was just wide open, then you may get something that's weak over here and something that's strong over here. So that person taking it needs something that's very consistent so that they know what kind of measured dose. And so that needs to be very much taken into consideration. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both for adding to that. Appreciate it. And now we'll go ahead and move to closing statements. So since you started off, we'll start out here with Jerald. And then once he's done, you can go ahead and give your closing statement.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam, for this opportunity. I will tell you that I respect all of the candidates that are running in this district. I believe that everyone has a deep and abiding love for the Constitution of the United States, and believe that it's a document that was divinely guided. My reverence for the Constitution began with a personal experience in Washington, D.C. when I was 16 years old. And shortly after that, I lived in a foreign country, as I mentioned before, a socialist country, and for 2 years, and I vowed at that time that I would do everything in my power to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and believe I've done my best to do so to this point in my life. I believe that preserving freedom means that we provide an education and job opportunities for our children, that we enhance markets, and that we give an opportunity for all to have a good life here. And I appreciate that and work hard towards that. So thank you very much.
I also have a respect for the other people running. It's not easy to run for office, and you're under a lot of scrutiny, and it's your life all of a sudden becomes public and not private, and so it's difficult. I actually, when I started getting interested in the Constitution and freedoms, I actually lived out in Washington D.C. area for 2 years and spent some time there. That was back during the Ronald Reagan administration, so it's been a few years. But I just, I think a lot about my father. My father fought in the Vietnam War, and it was his job to fill up the napalm bombs. He was in the Navy, and he was a fuel specialist. And for many years, he didn't talk much about it. And one day, I finally kind of cornered him, and he said that I said, you had it easy because you weren't fighting in the jungles. And finally he looked at me, he said, son, he says, I had to fill up those napalm bombs and I could see them going off at night and I knew what they were, the damage that they were doing. And that's the only time in 50 years that he spoke of that. And so I come to realize what the price is for freedom that our veterans pay. It's a high price. And some of them pay with their life. And they do that so that we can have those rights and freedoms. And I guess maybe my idea of rights and freedoms are different than other candidates because across the country, not so much in Idaho, but across the country now, we have people discussing if we should even have those rights and freedoms. And it's so frustrating to me that we've got people that have given their life for those freedoms and other people that just want to sign them away. And so the only way that we can keep those rights and freedoms is with a strict adherence to the Constitution. And understand that we cannot write law concerning that those rights and freedoms. And yet here we are, we're fighting for our freedom of religion, we're fighting for our free speech, we are fighting for our right to bear arms and our property rights and all these rights that are spelled out. We've even been fighting for due process, which was signed away by President Obama in the NDAA bill. And like I said, I respect other candidates, but if they're going to represent me, I want to see them fighting back against that a lot more. One of my purposes for running in office is to get into office in the state of Idaho so that we can put some concrete elements in there to fight back against this very thing. We have to restore the Constitution. If we don't, we're going to lose our country. And it's coming if we don't get the right people in there with the right legislation and the right backing to get that stopped. Thanks.
Thank you both.
Mm-hmm.